The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Monday, July 20th. I hope everybody is doing well. Let's see. Yeah, so today we'll cover some of the items in the news. The World Cup wrapped up over the weekend. Crazy England-France game. I didn't see the game, but then I had to go back and watch the highlights. I mean, 10 goals in a game. You never see that. That was, I guess I need to press that button. There we go. Now we have video. A crazy game, 10 goals. You never see that. It was super fun. And England beat France. That's always good. And and it was kind of exciting because the French almost came back, and England dominated the first half 4-0, and then it was 4-3, and then it was 5-3, and then it was 5-4, and there was 6-4. It just a back and forth, lots of goals. Always fun to see a game like that. Basically neither team was really playing defense for much of the game, but it was a completely open game. You wish more soccer was like that, and if there was a way to make soccer more like that, that would be football more like that. That would be great. I don't know how you do it. The fact is, teams can't play defense, and they do. And when they do, it's very hard to score goals, as we saw in the final. The final, on the other hand, was a boring game. Spain played well. I don't think spectacularly. Particularly, they couldn't score goals. Which, even though they dominated the game, they dominated possession. They had shots on goal. They were in the box. They had corners. They had, they had opportunities, lots of opportunities. They couldn't score, and Argentina just played terribly. I guess they were good on defense. Maybe they can get credit for Spain not scoring. I'm not even sure that's true. But other than that, they did nothing. They couldn't get the game going. They couldn't move the ball. They couldn't attack. And Messi was a non-entity the entire game, because unless Argentina attacks and gets in the ball somehow and organizes in a way to give him some space, there's just nothing he can do. And indeed, there was nothing he could do. So it was not a fun game to watch at all. Spain was the better team. I'm glad it won in the end. It deserved to win. It played better football. Argentina did not have a shot on goal for 115 minutes, right? The whole regular time and most of the extra time. So yeah, they played terribly. So why exactly? What's the blame? Of course, they also got pretty aggressive in the fouling, which resulted in one guy getting 2 yellow cards, which means a red card, which means they played with 10 players for a big chunk of the game. Another reason they couldn't attack and score. I'm glad it didn't go to penalty kicks, because I think Spain deserved to win, and I'm glad they won, and I'm glad they won, in a sense, playing football rather than penalty kicks, which I don't, it's inevitable that some games will be determined that way. It's not the greatest way to determine a game. So what was missing, I think what would have improved the game significantly, if Spain had scored a goal in the beginning of the first half. Like if Spain scored a goal 10 minutes in, it would have forced Argentina to take more risk, to push more, and to go into Spain's area and to try to score one way or the other, and it would have made a much more interesting game. The fact, unfortunately, that Spain did not score, they played beautifully, the passes were gorgeous, and all that, but they didn't score. It basically hurt the game, because the longer they didn't score, the more Argentina was playing for a tie. And then by the time they got to 10 players, they were suddenly playing for a tie. And yeah, it was just not good. And Messi did not have the opportunity to shine or to do anything dramatic or significant, sadly. All right, but I'm sad that the World Cup is over. I'm not really sad because, God, it consumed a lot of time. It was a lot of fun, so I don't regret it. A lot of fun. But I couldn't do this like every week. I mean, that would be impossible. I wouldn't get anything done. It was way, oh, I would get a lot done, but I would be exhausted. It was way too much work and trying to work around the football games and working into the night. As you know, I fly tomorrow to Austin to do an 8-hour seminar on capitalism with Don Watkins. And then I fly to Phoenix to do an 8-hour class on Ayn Rand, and then another 8-hour class on venture capital and private equity. So I'm going to be doing 24 hours basically of speaking. Don will relieve me a little bit in the first 8. 24 hours in 6 days. It's going to be intense. It's going to be super intense, and much of the intensity has been felt over the last week or so in prepping. I actually have to have outlines for all of these things. I actually have to know what I'm going to say about all these things. The Ayn Rand and venture capital stuff I've never taught before, so these are brand new courses. I don't have any prepared material. I mean, I obviously know my Ayn Rand stuff, and I know something about venture capital, but you still have to prepare to do an 8-hour course and entertain students and keep them engaged and alive and awake, and then it has to be on video, and it has to be well on video. So anyway, a lot of work went into that, and yeah. All right. Let's see what we want to do here. We'll start with as we always do, as we have done for the last few months. We'll start with Iran. Tragically, 2 more American soldiers were killed over the weekend in Jordan when a bomb, I guess, hit a building that was serving as, in a sense, barracks for the troops. It's so that, I don't know, that brings up the total in this war to 16. Trump is furious, of course, and the U.S. is going to attack them and do this and do that. But I mean, I repeat myself, but I guess you have to repeat yourself. U.S. has no strategy. There's no strategy on what to do with Iran. There's no end goal. Right now, the end goal is to open the Straits of Hormuz. But remember, Strait of Hormuz was open before the war started. So the end goal is to open the Strait of Hormuz and make sure they don't have a nuclear program, and ideally they don't have a missile program, and they stop funding terrorism around the region. Good luck achieving all that without regime change. Regime change would be a goal. But clearly that's not a goal. That's not how the bombing is going. It's not how any of this activity is going. It really is hard to tell what the United States is doing. Tonight was the 10th night in a row that the United States has been bombing Iran. But they don't bomb in the day. There's a certain period of hours that they bomb, and then they leave Iran alone for the rest of the time. What do they expect to achieve doing this? It's not clear. There's still a lot more that needs to be done just in order to keep the Strait of Hormuz open. The reality is that Iran is still attacking ships that are trying to pass through the strait. So they're still attacking ships that are passing through the strait successfully. The United States has not eliminated the threat yet. The bombing has not been intensive enough. It has not been on the right places. Ground troops have not taken over the islands. They still have enough boats to be able to to be able to pull this off. Right? So, yeah, I mean, no strategy. It turns out there was never a strategy to open the Strait of Hormuz since the beginning of the war. And there's still no strategy about anything, about the very nature of this. Right? Never. So this is just it's a disaster. You know, as I said with the negotiations, the fact that they've started bombing again is better than negotiating, but not much better. And it's very expensive. And there's a real risk of the United States running out of ammunition. And Trump seems oblivious to all of this. Oil prices are going up. He's not oblivious to that. Oil prices are going up, but the reality is that that none of the war aims are being achieved. None of them. Well, actually, 3 Americans killed, 2 in Jordan and 1 in Iraq, when during a controlled detonation of a downed Iranian drone, I guess something went wrong. Trump went on social media today and said, every time Iran kills an American soldiers, they will pay for that killing many times over. What does that mean? How are they going to pay? What are they going to pay? Another bridge? Another what? Another boat? Another refinery? And 3 soldiers? 10 soldiers? 1,000 soldiers? How many soldiers are going to die for every American? And what is the end game? Revenge? Vengeance? U.S. Central Command said Sunday's airstrikes targeted Iranian military command centers, air defense and coastal surveillance sites, maritime capabilities, missile drone launches sites, and communication networks. Exactly the same things that they said every single night for the last 10 nights. So, you know, what more? Right. Now, suppose the United States did attack Tabriz, and Tabriz is believed to have huge underground missile bases run by the RGC, but were those missile bases hit? Not clear. And again, most of the airstrikes were in the southwest, around the Bandar, around the strait, basically, the shore of the strait. But yeah, no strategy, no. You know, are we in all-out war? Are we not in all-out war? And again, no goals, no aims, just nothingness. I mean, Iran senses the weakness, and it boldly threatened over the weekend. It basically is thinking about invading Kuwait in order to seize 2 U.S. military bases, take the soldiers hostage, bring them back to Iran. I mean, could you imagine? And they could do it. They could do it. The U.S. right now is so, I don't know, ill-prepared, unthinking. Imagine if the Iranians invaded Iraq, took the 2 U.S. bases, took American soldiers hostage, and forced them back into Iran. I mean, Trump would be apoplectic, but what would he do? He'd negotiate. Get the hostages back, negotiate. Of course, to get to Kuwait, they'd probably go through Iraq, although they have a small border with Kuwait, so hard to tell what exactly they would do. But yeah, I mean, I don't think they'll do it because I think they're afraid. But is the U.S. prepared for something like that? One would hope. But given the United States is not being prepared really for anything, I'm super skeptical. I mean, as I said originally, the U.S. was not prepared for the taking, the closing of the Strait of Hormuz, which was the obvious thing the Iranians were going to do once war started. So, Why would anything at this point surprise you? Nothing should surprise you at this point. All right, let's see. AI. So, yeah, we talked about last time. We talked about the fact that Kimi K3 is out, and it is as good on certain parameters as the OpenAI Anthropic leading AI, right? But today, I guess Alibaba announced that it has a new AI model. And it is just almost as good as Fable 5 and better than ChatGPT 5.6. I think 5.6 is the latest. And it is also going to be open source. It boasts 2.4 trillion parameters. I don't even know how to get my head around what that how that works and what that means. I don't think anybody can really. It's their flagship large language models, and it's available and will be ultimately available in the United States. Alibaba says it's the new models among the most powerful available today, comparable to leading frontier AI models from the US, second only to Fable 5. It plans to make the model open weight soon, so open source. You can actually make changes to it. And it'll be available for developers to download and modify, which means outside of control. Again, so these are two Chinese models now, open source, much cheaper than Anthropic and OpenAI, and outside the control of the US government and available to all. It again places serious question marks on the business model of OpenAI and Anthropic. What are they actually going to do? How are they going to charge their really high fees when you can get Alibaba's model for a lot less and for something that's almost just as good? There's also Z.AI, which constantly puts out new models, and it is likely to catch up. Alibaba stock went up 5% on the Hong Kong exchange, and generally, Chinese tech were up. Other AI models, so it's going to be, there's real competition. And the thing about China is, China's applying these AI models really fast. They have a robust startup environment in China. They're applying these AI models to robots and to apps. There was just an AI, I guess, convention in China. It's the biggest AI convention in China, is on right now. It's in Shanghai. It's 20 football fields of exhibits filled with hardware, applying AI to everyday life. Earbuds that listen to a meeting and produce the transcripts. Robots were everywhere, supposedly, dancing in unison, making cappuccinos, shooting soccer balls, messaging visitors, and playing the piano. A Fury AI pet batted its eyelashes at cooing onlookers. Somebody showed me a little Fury AI pet that did very little, but anyway, responded somehow to your emotion. It was weird. But yeah, these things are going to be huge, right? Fury pets, furry little things that are super cute, make cute noises, and somehow vibrate based on the emotion that you have, and who knows what else do. These are going to be huge. There's going to be a massive market for these things. I mean, if you want to start up and make money, that's the thing, I'm telling you. Anyway, this is I guess where Alibaba announced. You can see videos online of robots playing soccer, and China is all in. Chinese companies are all in. Chinese regulation of AI, as long as it doesn't criticize the Chinese government and doesn't present the actual history of China. Everything else, I mean, free speech is constrained, but pretty much everything else is a go in China. And the entrepreneurial environment is robust. And this is going to be huge, and it's going to be all over the world. People are going to be using these AI models. And again, the Chinese models are open source. Any developer can download it, tinker with it, change it, apply it to a particular app, to a particular application, particular robot, particular thing, without having to pay these unbelievable high rates to Anthropic and OpenAI. So, yeah. So, in the past, they believed, Americans believed, that these AI models that the Chinese were coming out with were basically models based on American models, some kind of distillation of the Anthropic and OpenAI models. They no longer believe that, given the success of these other models. There's something else going on here. And they're doing this again. I remind you, said this earlier, or said this in a previous show. They're doing this without NVIDIA chips, without the top-end NVIDIA chips, at least not in quantity. They might have a few that they've smuggled in, but they're doing it without the quantity of AI chips. And in the meantime, in the US, we're restricting Anthropic by, we have Fable, but Fable has guardrails, and these guardrails restrict its use. These OpenAI models have no guardrails. Indeed, according to David Sachs, Kimi 3, I'm reading from a tweet of his, Kimi 3 just fixed 15 critical security bugs that Codex and Fable refused because of cyber guardrails. He continues, there's no reason to limit American models on tasks that Chinese models handle without issue. We're only making ourselves less competitive. He says, here's another example. Hugging Face, which is a company, I guess, tried using American frontier models to analyze an AI-powered cyber attack. But the guardrails blocked the request, containing real exploit payloads. So they switched to GLM 5.2, running locally. The guardrails actually impaired defensive security. So we're putting guardrails because the government's afraid. Generally, I'd say one of the differences between us and Chinese companies is Americans are driven much more by fear. We're afraid. Chinese are not driven by fear. They're driven by tech optimism, driven by the idea that, tech will allow them to match the United States and beat us. And, the U.S. shouldn't be competing with China. The U.S. should just be producing the best damn stuff in the world. But we're not going to because we're afraid. We won't build, gas power plants, electricity plants, because we're afraid of the climate. We won't build nuclear power plants because we're afraid of radiation or whatever. We won't build because we're afraid that some worm's habitat will be destroyed. We won't, push ahead with AI because we're afraid AI is going to destroy all the jobs. And by the way, it's probably Terminator, and they're going to want to kill all human beings and wipe us all out. And people really believe this. I met, was it last year? A year ago, June last year. I met a very well-known and well-established computer science specialist in AI, kind of a guru in the field, who's a fan of mine, it turns out. He listens to my show once in a while. And he said, no, I mean, we've got maybe 2 years, maybe 3, humanity's finished. AI will kill us all. And we don't know how to stop it. I mean, that kind of fear, yeah. And the White House continuously thinks about an FDA for AI, but, right now, without an FDA for AI, it's just kind of random regulations. It's not clear what the standard is. It's not clear what it's trying to achieve. Here's from a report written by some economist. It says the White House's executive order on frontier AI supposedly set up a voluntary evaluation process for frontier AI models that, according to the text, should not be interpreted as a pre-release vetting or licensing regime. However, once Anthropic decided to expand access to its Fable and Mythos models, the White House responded by invoking export control powers that would prevent foreign nationals from accessing these models, even if they reside in the United States. As Anthropic itself admitted, enforcing this mandate was so complex that there was no choice but to shut down the models. Before this incident, there was no indication that these export controls would be invoked, could be invoked, and Anthropic and the AI industry at large were caught off guard. This episode clearly draws out the issue with the current evaluation regime. It is seemingly arbitrary. Yeah. The industry has no clear and public standard over what would make a model safe or dangerous, and there is no clarity over what the executive can and cannot do to the models it deems to be too dangerous to release. This uncertainty, as seen in recent examples, can disrupt not only AI companies, but also businesses worldwide that rely on these products. They go on to say, to be clear, heavy-handed, pre-approved processes like those used by the FDA are deeply flawed and ultimately an undesirable approach for government moving fast, for governing fast-moving AI. However, it is an established process that must make decisions on technical grounds tied to specific risks rather than broad concerns about perceived capacity or computing power. This guarantees due process, provides a degree of predictability in outcome, and ensures appropriate congressional oversight. All these are currently lacking in the White House's ad hoc approach. Yeah, there's nothing worse than the arbitrary. And that's what AI regulations are like right now. It's not that they're not being regulated, they are. But who knows what those regulations are? Who knows what they mean? Who knows how they're being applied? Who knows on what they will be applied to? So what's going to happen? I mean, OpenAI and Anthropic are in trouble, I think. They're in trouble because, one, they are susceptible to the White House's arbitrary regulations. And B, their whole business model relies on charging very high fees for the use of their models. And they have to compete with open source models that are dramatically cheaper. Dramatically cheaper. So what's the solution? I mean, I think I know what the solution is. And I think this is a solution that many people within the Trump administration are probably leaning towards. The solution is for the United States government to take a 10% stake in all American AI companies, and then to ban China's best AI models from being used in the United States, forcing American companies and American consumers to use only American models. So this is quite possible. It's easy to argue that there's national security issues here. Commerce has already floated entity list threats, security advisories, and executive orders to scare everyone off the Chinese models. Now, these were killed internally in the past, but really, we really think that this is, I mean, Trump, I don't think this will be killed indefinitely. I mean, J.D. Vance is not going to kill it. Donald Trump is not going to kill it. I don't know who would kill it. David Sachs, maybe, but David Sachs is not there anymore. And it's not clear how independent he was to begin with. So the real danger here is that the U.S. will ride to the rescue of American AI companies by banning competition from, in this case, Chinese companies, and do it in the name of national security so nobody can argue with it. And as a consequence, give us models that are protected from competition and therefore will probably be less good and going to be super expensive. Super expensive. But particularly if the U.S. government has a equity stake in it, they could argue, oh, this is good for the American people, and the American people will make money, their money back because their equity will go up and all that garbage. Socialism, in other words, or semi-socialism, whatever the hell they want to call it. Fascism, maybe. So that, to me, seems like a reasonable out, not a reasonable in terms of good, reasonable in terms of the way the Trump administration would think about this, out to the dilemma that they face. And something, by the way, that Anthropic and OpenAI are likely to lobby for. They're likely to lobby for it. They want that protection. Their business model depends on it. They have IPOs, which should happen any week now, are dependent on them being able to charge huge amounts of money for what they're providing, because the reality is that they're going to be spending, gazillions of dollars on data centers. And to make that money back, they're going to have to charge a lot of money. And people are going to have to use their models a lot. And that means no competition from cheap Chinese models that are just as good and don't need as many data centers, which you have to wonder what the hell is going on. You have to wonder about these data centers. Are they really needed? How are the Chinese producing similar models without them? How are they doing it without the most advanced chips in the world? I thought to train these models, you needed super duper most advanced chips possible. Chinese don't have the kind of data centers we have. They will build them, and they can build them. They don't have the restrictions we have. They don't have New York saying no data centers here for a year. Even Texas is considering no data centers here. They don't have not in my backyard. In China, they decide to do it. They just do it for better, mostly for worse, but sometimes for better. Well, really never for better if you take the whole picture in mind. So OpenAI and Anthropic are probably asking for the regulation and probably making the national security point. So we're heading towards a more statist economy where the leading tech, I think, is going to be protected by government. It's a little scary. I mean, government has done little things like this, but nothing, I think, on the cutting edge like this is. Ian says, Kimmy, K3 is not really open yet. They haven't actually released the model on weights. We should stick to the facts. No, but they say they will. And other Chinese models have, and there's reason to believe they will. The what do you call it? The Alibaba model hasn't released any of that yet. They've only just announced that the model is what it is. Nobody's actually seen it or used it. But I doubt they're actually going to renege on that. Now, maybe these models are not as good as people claim they are, not as good as the companies claim they are. It's mainly the companies. But yeah, it's all right. So yeah, AI is going to be the front in which markets and government intersect, and we'll see. We'll see how it develops into the future, right? Yeah, Ian says you can pay for it. So currently, yeah, you can buy the model, you can pay for it, but they haven't given you access to the models themselves, the open source kind of stuff. But they say they're going to. Right? All right. ChatGPT 5.6 seems pretty top-notch to me. Kevin says, yeah, it is top-notch. But supposedly these Chinese models are just as good, and they cost a fraction, a lot less. I mean, I use ChatGPT and Claude, and sometimes Gemini, and yeah, they for the purposes I need them, they're great. I haven't tried the Chinese models. It would be interesting to try the Chinese models. Right now, the reason I would continue to pay is because these models are being trained on me, but it wouldn't take that long for me to train a new model on my stuff. So, there's a lot. Yeah, the fact that the American models are good models, the best models right now, it's a question of price point. And for most individuals, it's not very expensive. But for businesses that use this intensely, it's hugely expensive. And if they can build their own models in-house on their own servers, then why not? All right. All right, another story we keep returning to, and we'll keep returning to probably throughout the Trump administration, is ICE. There was an interesting story in the New York Times, some investigative reporting into what happens to people who are arrested by ICE on assault charges. So these are people typically taking the photos, supposedly assaulting officers. We keep hearing about assaulting officers and harassing them and interfering in investigations and all of that. And it turns out the Trump administration has already filed assault charges against more than 550 people. 550 people. So these could be American citizens, legal residents, it could be anybody, right? Now, so far, of the 550, 400 have been resolved. That is, 400 have got a court or been settled in advance. Half of those have basically gone against the government. Either juries have acquitted defenders, judges have thrown out the charges, or prosecutors just withdrew them for lack of any hope of success. I mean, half. Now that's an abysmal record for a Justice Department that almost never loses criminal cases. In 90% of Justice Department criminal cases, 90%, 90, defendants plead guilty or are convicted at trial. 90%. And here 50% don't even make it. Or 50% total, they can't get a conviction. These reporters supposedly obtained court filings of every assault case, reviewed hearing transcripts, interviewed witnesses and federal officials, watched videos of dozens of encounters that led to them. And, the administration is basically using the, use of the law as being less about protecting federal agents than about providing legal cover to cower protesters and immigrants into submission. You charge people without merit to shut them up, to silence them, to get them away, to have them stop filming, to have demonstrations go away. And, really this is a way of intimidating people to silence them. So, they've tried to dial back some of their more confrontational tactics. So there are fewer assault charges now than there were earlier in the year. But there's a new big wave of enforcement that's pretty aggressive. We've seen now 2 immigrants being killed, one in Texas and one in Maine. And, we'll see what happens moving forward. But according to this, in dozens of cases, court records and videos show federal agents were first to get physical, involved in shoving, tackling, or pepper spraying defendants. Many defendants successfully argued that the assaults they were accused of were actually acts of self-defense. And this worked. Judges repeatedly chastised prosecutors and immigration agents for misconduct, including distorting facts and withholding evidence. 2 judges found that agents purposefully destroyed evidence, including ordering a defendant to delete cell phone photos. Officers charged more than 24 people who were filming or following agents, often while honking car horns, blowing whistles, or shouting warnings like, "La migra is coming." There was no allegation of physical contact with the agents. In more than 100 cases, prosecutors did not claim that any agents were injured. In at least 7 other cases, officers' injuries were caused by their own colleagues' actions. A judge last fall dismissed assault charges against an immigrant, ruling that the agent involved had been cut by shards of glass from a car window he himself had smashed. 65 times, prosecutors abandoned or downgraded charges before hitting a deadline to present evidence to a grand jury or judge. Former prosecutors said this pattern of rapid retreat was unusual and signaled that the cases should never have been brought. So, ICE is abusive. ICE is, going after people for no reason. And, the videos are out there, the examples are out there. I recommend reading the entire story. It has lots of examples and stories. And you could say this is the New York Times. It is the New York Times, but the New York Times is the only newspaper I know of that actually went and got the records and screened the records. And their bias might be that they're doing this story and not other stories that would maybe paint the left in a bad light, like what happened at Planter, and I talked about that when they didn't. But they did the work here. And I don't see right-wing people going nuts about this is all lies and this is wrong. I don't see anybody suing the New York Times for defamation because they got their stats wrong and their stories are wrong. So yeah, it's a long story. It's a long article, investigative journalism. The reality is that the mainstream media are the only people who actually do well-documented, methodologically valid investigative journalism. They're biased. They're biased in the stories they pick and the stories they don't pick. And they may be biased in some of the conclusions they come to. But the data is the data. And they're the only ones who get the data. We wouldn't have any data about what ICE is doing without the mainstream media investigating. All right. Democratic Socialists of America, a favorite political party. Democratic Socialists in America is a separate political party from the Democrats, but who are the Democrats are fielding a number of candidates that are basically Democratic Socialists of America, have Democratic Socialists of America influences, ideas. They support the Democratic Socialists of America platform. They're all in on DSA in spite of running as Democrats. So it's worthwhile looking at what the DSA's platform actually is. Because, a lot of these candidates believe in this stuff. And what the DSA, what these candidates are trying to do, I mean, I don't think they have a chance, but they're trying to do, is turn the Democratic Party into a DSA party. They're trying to move it to the DSA. So what does the DSA believe? It believes in government-run food. So agriculture would be government-run. Supply chains for food, grocery stores, all of that, Costco, Walmart, all of that would be government-run. Forget about private farming. And we know collectivizing farms and collectivizing the supply chain of food has worked magic in places like Venezuela. Just amazing. Just amazing. So, it's so government-run food. They want us to starve to death, in other words. Government-run housing. We know how that ends. Horrible housing. Government-run medicine. A lot less medicine. Government-run transportation. Yeah, I mean, those bus services and those subway systems that the government runs are just amazing how well kept and well maintained and how well functioning they are. And they want to nationalize all large corporations and essential industries. So why, they just want to nationalize AI. Just have the government run it. Well, I mean, probably if you push the DSA, they'd say the workers should run it. Everything should be run as co-ops. So ultimately, AI should be, Anthropic and OpenAI should be co-ops. They want to draft a new constitution for the United States. To hell with the existing constitution. They want to defund the Department of War. We should basically completely, dismantle our military. Slavery reparations. Unlimited free abortions and gender-affirming care for all, including minors. And it should be free. The government should pay for all of it. Taxpayers pay for everyone's entire student debt. And they want free higher education for all. And for as many degrees as you want. They want to take steps, not all the way immediately. They want to take steps towards fully abolishing the police and the prison system. So no police, no prisons. And they want to abolish, little things like the presidency, the Supreme Court, and the Senate. In other words, they want a pure democracy. They want a pure democracy, majority rule for everything, except the majority can't decide on things they don't like. So if the majority votes against abortion, that is not acceptable. So there's certain things that this new constitution will probably protect, the right to an abortion and the right to food and the right to an education and the right to, the government has to give you all these things no matter how people vote. So that is the DSA. And these people are serious. They're being interviewed right now on TV everywhere because they're very, very successful within the Democratic Party. There's enough Democrats who believe in this stuff. I mean, this is the MAGA of the left. In some senses, politically more delusional than the MAGA of the left. The MAGA of the left, the MAGA still want to work within the existing constitution. They still have some semblance of maybe we like it. These people just abolish it. So these are more extreme, more radical than MAGA. This is the crazy left. This is the hippies of the 60s who've rebirth of the hippies in the 60s. And, McGovern, who ran in 72, is, would embrace much of this, not all of it. They abolished the police and prisons. I wonder how many Americans would vote for that. Wonder how many Americans would vote for that. All right, crazy leftists, crazy rightists. It's a frigging crazy world. Yeah. Somebody who asked, without prisons, what will the DSA do with political prisoners? Firing squads. Yeah, I mean, they won't call them prisoners. They'll call them gulags, concentration camps. And they won't call them police. What did Mao call? I mean, oh no, I know what they'll call them. Sorry. They won't be prisons. They won't be gulags. They won't be concentration camps. What do we know they'll be called? This is for sure the name that they will give them. Anybody want to guess? What is the name that DSA members would send their political opponents to? What will be the name of the facility that they send them to? It's straight out of Mao. And these people are, yes, 1, 2, 3 think is absolutely right. And so is Shahbaz. Re-education camps. These will be re-education camps. I mean, they're not prisons. They're educating. They're giving you a value. It's good for you. It's actually for your own good you're going there. It's all for your own good. And they won't call them the police. They won't call them the Secret Service. What would they call them? I mean, I can't remember what Mao's thugs, the students who rounded up people to send them to re-education camps during the Cultural Revolution. They'll call them revolutionaries. I don't know what they'll call them. There was something out of Mao. They'll call them something out of Mao. I mean, I don't know if you saw Hassan Piker. Tell everybody that, go on a show and say, Mao is one of his political heroes. We know this because when, he went to China and was praising Mao to the hilt. This is the killing fields. Right. Jason said, just rewatch the killing fields. Yeah, you should watch First They Killed My Father. I think it's better than the killing fields. All right, more emotionally impactful. Red Guards, they'll call them Red Guards. The protectors, they'll call them protectors of the revolution. All right, J.D. Vance is in the news a lot, and he keeps coming into the news. He's got a new book out, which I'll probably have to read, but he's got a new book out. He is emerging as the consensus leader of the new right. And in his new book, and as well as interviews that he's done, among the other things that J.D. Vance attacks is the idea of GDP, an idea of comparing GDPs across countries, GDP per capita across different countries. Life is not about GDP, he will tell you, right? The economy is not allowed GDP. And so I thought we'd talk a little bit about this, and there's Noah Smith wrote a good article about this. So this is from J.D. Vance's book. If you're focused on GDP, a $6 pint of Japanese strawberries is no different from a $6 pint of American strawberries. If you're focused on dollars and cents, each contributes equally to the economic indicators, to GDP. But if everyone in Japan eats better strawberries than everyone in America, assuming Japanese strawberries are much better than American ones, the economic indicators fail to measure something meaningful. And that's absolutely true. GDP does not capture quality. It does not capture quality. Neither, by the way, do most, inflation numbers. In my view, inflation over the last 100 and something years has been overstated. Most free market people out there think that inflation is understated. And certainly the price of gold suggests that it's understated. But I would argue that it's overstated. Inflation, the increase in prices, not the monetary, increase in prices has been overstated. Prices have gone up a lot less because what the CPI, particularly historically, more so today, did not capture is the dramatic increase in quality, but more than that, the dramatic increase in new products that weren't there before. So the jump in standard of living, in spite of us paying the same price or maybe a little bit higher price, the jump in standard of living is much higher. So he's right. He's right. Japan has a lot of products and services that are a little bit nicer than what we have in America. And, according to Noah, he gives some examples. Japan has cleaner tables at Starbucks, slightly better tasting food, and things like that, right? And if you try to adjust for quality differences between different countries, you're not going to go anywhere because it's too hard to do. And of course, even the quality differences are, to some degree, individual. Different people, different places. So you can't really compare these kind of quality differences between countries, whereas GDP is pretty straightforward and is easy to compare. There are lots of problems with GDP. Lots of problems with GDP. And particularly if you're comparing countries with different lifestyles. And so you could point that out and you could talk about, challenges with GDP and how to adjust them or not, and how to just look at GDP numbers, but then also look underneath the hood and look at other differences. But J.D. Vance, of course, doesn't do that. This is what he says. When I got back home, a friend asked me if I'd learned anything on my trip to Japan. Yes, I replied snidely. Maybe economics is just fake. In other words, for J.D. Vance, just throw out GDP completely. And here's what he says that makes what he's really after clear. Quote, as the decline of Christianity, surprise, surprise, has left us without a shared moral language, economics has stepped into the vacuum. We pretend they are scientific answers to questions of values. Take one of the major issues of the 2024 campaign and a significant focus of our time in the White House. Should our trade policy be oriented around protecting domestic industries and jobs, or around ensuring a short-term supply of cheap consumer goods? Now, note the complete false dichotomy there. Complete false dichotomy. You're not trading, those are not the two things you're trading off. I mean, you could say, should our trade policy be oriented towards protecting domestic industries and jobs, or around providing a higher standard of living, quality of life, innovation, and progress in America? Maybe that's the trade-off. I think that's closer to trade-off. But he's purposefully setting up the trade-off, in a different way. Now, Christianity gave us moral language, moral values, where we could evaluate this. And if it was between supply of cheap consumer goods and protecting jobs, well, of course you protect jobs. Christianity, sacrifice the consumers to the job owners, as if there's a conflict there, as if the people with jobs are not the people who consume. The whole way of framing this is so wrong and so skewed. So it's demagogy. And again, J.D. Vance is too smart not to know this. I mean, the idea that economists urge values of base consumerism on society and ignore other moral considerations is just BS. Vance, at the end of the day, wants us to care about spiritual elevation, morality, community. The things that American right cares about. I mean, the left, what does the left care about? Inequality, power. I mean, they're all the same. They all want to dabble and use government in order to achieve their particular ends. Vance goes on to write, we now live in a society almost blinded to considerations outside of the economic. I wish. Because the economic is better than any other considerations these people would bring up. Now, I don't argue for economic values as the primary, but I'd argue for economic values above the values that J.D. Vance argues for. This way of thinking is inherently opposed to the Christian way, which demands more focus on people. Take, for instance, the time we spend with our children. Domestic labor, that done by moms and dads. If unpaid, is uncounted in measures of GDP. That's right, because it's not economically productive. GDP only counts economically productive activities. It's productive in a personal sense. It's vastly important in a personal sense, but not an economic one. He continues, when I leave work to spend time with my children, when I cook them dinner or argue with them about eating their carrots, I'm engaged in economically unproductive work. That's right. No money changes hands. That's right. So it doesn't show up in our national figures. By contrast, if I left for dinner at 6 p.m. and returned to work until midnight while paying a total stranger to look after my kid, my contribution to GDP would be much higher. Absolutely. But of course, part of the reason you can work shorter hours and take care of your kids is because you've made enough money to be able to do that. Not the case in very poor societies. He continues, if you step away from the glory of economic statistics, so much of American life has gone wrong. An influx of prescription opioids became a flood of synthetic opioids, which has led to tens of thousands of deaths each year and a declining life expectancy among a substantial portion of our society. That's because we criminalized it. So we took it out of the sphere of economics and made it the sphere of black market. We took it out of the white market and put it into the black market. Economics doesn't change. He goes on, we have made great progress. And by the way, this all assumes, this is the way, it just drives me crazy, the way they talk about the opioids, as if the opioids force you to use them. The opioids come into the country and you have to use them. It's like they force themselves on you. Once they enter the country, once prescription is written, you have to take them. I mean, I've had opioids. Doctors have prescribed me opioids, and I will take one or two, and then I'll stop taking them because I don't want them as painkillers. You have a choice. You have a choice. He says, we have made great progress in reducing infant mortality, but we send our children into a world, even in the physical security of their own homes, that bombards them with images and influences that have left them isolated, depressed, and increasingly at risk of self-harm. Really. We are more disconnected, lonely, and isolated, even in the midst of historical levels of material comfort. It's true, and you should ask the question of why. Because his return is always Christian values. All this economic abundance coexists with intense spiritual misery. We orient people towards a life of consumption. Who's we? We tell them to find meaning in the home they buy, the money they earn, the prestige of their jobs. Who's we? We bombard them with all manner of creature comforts and add their consumption, price club, mega-sized junk to our national GDP. It's just economics. We use that GDP as a yardstick for our broader society, which is why it's impossible for false profit, why it's possible for false profit economists to argue that the American dream is healthy, even as suicide and addiction rates soar and the laughter of children fades from our streets. Wow. I mean, where do they get such a dark perspective on life? Where does it come from? It comes from, some kind of Christian apocalypse insanity. Addiction rates soaring, addiction rates are actually going down dramatically. Death from addiction way down over the last few years. since 2023 or 2024. Last 3 years, way down. Is suicide really way up? Probably not. And how much of this is related to the fact that people keep telling them how bad things are for them? How much is this because we don't teach them to take personal responsibility for their own happiness? How much of this is because we don't teach them a moral code of self-interest, a pursuit of happiness? It's not for the lack of Christianity. Christianity's going gung-ho. I mean, it's shrinking a little bit, but only at the margins. It's still a vast majority of Americans are Christian. But, you know, what are we talking about? And by the way, suicide and drug addiction lower GDP. So economists should be against them. You know, the more opioids you take, the less hard you work. Here's from a Philadelphia Fed report in 2023. There's growing evidence that the opioid epidemic has harmed many aspects of the real economy, including the labor market, consumer finance, municipal finance. According to analysis from the Council of Economic Advisors 2019 report, the annual economic cost of opioid epidemic, including the cost of lives lost, is estimated about $700 billion in 2018 alone, and over $2.5 trillion from 2015 to 2018. That's a lot. So if you care about GDP, you don't want opioids. And if we took away people's SUVs and took away their massive homes and took away their large screen TVs and high-speed internet access, and what would we have? If we took away their AC, we'd have Europe. Is that what we want? Is being poorer the alternative? And if we took away even more, we'd have the Middle Ages. So, you know, what is the solution? I mean, I know what he thinks the solution is. The solution is more Christianity. And, you know, if you look at measures of GDP versus life expectancy, highly correlated. Higher GDP, the longer you live. If you look at measures of GDP related to child mortality, the higher the GDP, the fewer kids die. If you look at GDP related to maternal deaths, the higher the GDP, the fewer mothers die at childbirth. If you look at measures of GDP related to how many doctors there are, medical doctors, higher the GDP, generally, the more doctors you have. If you look at GDP versus high-quality water, like clean water. Now, here, the good news is a lot of poor countries have clean water because rich countries have helped them get there and given them the technology. But the reality is, the higher the GDP, the more likely it is you have access to clean drinking water. Electricity. I mean, if you look at how many, you know, people traveling, tourism. So is it good for people in one country to go travel the world? Well, it turns out the higher the GDP of the country, the more traveling they do. The more tourists, the more they become tourists. That's kind of good. And then with regard to his claim about the parent who works long hours and all that, average annual working hours drop significantly the higher the GDP is. It's just absurd. Average years in schooling is higher the higher the GDP is. Literacy rates correlated with GDP. Learning outcomes, that is, what do you know after school, correlated with GDP. I mean, it's not perfect correlations. There are exceptions, and the U.S. doesn't always do well in all these measures, but basically. And then if you just ask people if they're satisfied with life, countries with high GDP have greater satisfactions with life than countries with low GDP. That's just reality. Now, that's GDP per capita more, right? So I think all the correlations I told you are GDP per capita, GDP per capita. But to get GDP per capita high, you have to have high GDP. So for example, China has high GDP, but low GDP per capita. So it's not really, really high on any one of these parameters. Like life satisfaction in China, pretty low. Life satisfaction in the US, very high. And we have high GDP per capita, among the highest in the world. And if you look at Norway, which actually has higher GDP per capita than the US, it has higher life satisfaction, whatever the hell that means. Let's assume there's some, Israel has high life satisfaction, high GDP per capita, relatively speaking, to the rest of the world. And there's some exceptions. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar have high GDP per capita and low life satisfaction. It has to do with the regime, right? So GDP, not a perfect measure, misses a lot of things, flawed in many, many ways. But the reality is that it's as good as we got. It's actually quite good. Actually quite good. And it's highly correlated with a lot of other things that are really good. All right, let's look at some achievements quickly. Here's a cool one. The American Bureau of Shipping, whatever the hell that is, has approved, it's the regulatory agency that I guess approves ships, approved the design of a container ship that would run on 2 modular salt nuclear reactors placed at midship where collision and wave loads are lowest. With no fuel tanks and no funnel that feed volume carries, that take up space, in other words. This ship could carry 15,000 containers at 25 knots on a hull sized, it's sized for the Panama Canal. For the Panama Canal, once it's widened, I think they're widening it right now. So that's pretty cool. I think this is a South Korean ship, a South Korean design, of course. They are innovators in ship design. And again, they've received approval in principle from the American Bureau of Shipping for the conceptual design of this container ship. And that'd be cool. We start having nuclear-powered container ships, moving stuff. I mean, it's unbelievably cheap to move product today from place to place. Imagine how much cheaper it's going to become if you could have nuclear power ships doing it. And assuming, the regulations didn't make this so expensive. Now, the salt, so, the radiation is not a big problem from what I take. And remember that we've got nuclear power submarines, we've got nuclear power aircraft carriers that do fine. Here's a weird one, right? The FCC has just approved, the federal government has just approved, the FCC, plans by a startup company to test a satellite that would use a 60-foot mirror to reflect sunlight back to Earth after dark. As part of a project the company says would power solar farms, provide light for rescue workers, and illuminate city streets. I mean, that sounds a little wild, and I don't know how it illuminates city streets exactly, other than illuminating the whole city, and I'm not sure people would want that. There's a purpose for night, sleep, and I don't know that you want everything around you illuminated. But it is kind of an interesting concept, and it would solve a big problem for solar farms if you could do this cheaply enough. But, it sounds expensive and impractical. But, I think it's super cool that people thinking outside the box and crazy ideas and trying to build stuff and, go for it and let's see what works and what doesn't. These are startups, people putting up private capital to try these things and to see if they work. Shazbot says with the nuclear ships, the ships has an advantage due to the unlimited supply of cooling water. Yeah, absolutely. Great point. Okay, just some other stuff that just is just amazingly positive news. 92% of the world's population had access to electricity in 2024. That's up from 84% in 2010. About 86% of those still without electricity live in sub-Saharan Africa. But pretty much everybody else outside of sub-Saharan Africa has electricity. 75% of global population had access to clean cooking fuels in 2024. That's up from 57% in 2010. That's a huge improvement, 20%. These are kind of the intangibles that you probably don't actually get from GDP. For example, electricity. How many people have electricity is not captured by increases in GDP, and yet there it is. Because, I mean, you spend to build the electric infrastructure, but then it's done. The amount of energy used per unit of economic output fell from approximately 4.75 megajoules in a 2021, per 2021 purchasing power parity adjusted dollars of GDP. That was in 2010, 4.75. So these are all adjusted. Just assume they're all adjusted dollars. 4.75 to 3.76 in 2023, a decline of 21%. So that now, in order to produce the same unit of output, it takes 21% less energy, which is amazing. Truly amazing. And that means increased efficiency, increased productivity, and the ability to produce more with the same amount of energy, 20% more. Bottom line, the world is getting better. And the world is getting better, to a large extent, the world is getting better because GDP is growing, because we're getting richer. It's getting richer that makes it possible for us to get better. All right, guys, that is the news for this Monday, July 20th. Thank you all for being here. Wow, we had a great super chat day. While I was doing that, we got a bunch of $50 questions and a few $20 questions and then a few $5, but I think the majority of questions are like $50 and above. So thank you to all of you guys. This is amazing. And it we're basically short $45 for the third hour goal, which we might go into the third hour, given how many questions we actually have. All right, so I will remind you, this show is made possible through contributions of you, the listener. Couldn't happen without you. So thank you. Your support makes this show possible. Couldn't exist without you. I'd have to do something different for my income. The way to support the show is the super chats is great. Stickers are fantastic, where you don't have to ask questions. You just make a contribution on YouTube. YouTube is a good place for those of you who are live, but most of you, an overwhelming majority of you, listen to this show, watch this show when it's not live and you can't actually contribute. For you, the best place to contribute, and you should contribute because I assume you're listening because you get a value, and you should trade with me instead of just consuming my product without payment. You can do that on Patreon or on PayPal. Just search Yaron Brook Show on Patreon and PayPal, set up an account, create a monthly regular contribution, and then forget about it. And then you don't have to worry about it. And every time I bug you about making a contribution, you can check that off in your head. Done that. It's all done. It's good. All right, our sponsors. I want to remind you that there's going to be a fantastic conference in Austin, Texas, September 11th through 13th. You can find the program online. And those of you who are 35 and younger are eligible to apply for a scholarship. I know Lincoln has already applied and has got his interview. The scholarship application is a multi-stage application, but you should apply. You've got nothing to lose and a lot to gain. You can get, a free They cover travel expenses and your tuition. So apply. You can apply on aynrand.org/YBS. Aynrand.org/YBS, and you'll see a link there to the application. DefendersOfCapitalism.com is a website dedicated to defending capitalism from a moral, philosophical, economic, political, social perspective. Run by Michael Williams. I have contributed much to the program. Check it out. Sign up for the newsletter and support our efforts to bring the education of capitalism to the world. Finally, Alex Epstein. Alex Epstein is the world authority on all things energy related. Also, what do you call it? AI data centers. That's a big thing for him right now. AI data centers. So check out the AI data centers work that he's done. alexepstein.substack.com. alexepstein.substack.com. And that's it. So reminder, Patreon. And you can also use PayPal. Support the show. Really, really appreciate it. Let's see. All right, let's just jump into the super chat. Let's start with Remo for $68, 60 euros, which turns into like almost $70. Not at the actual exchange rate YouTube supplies me. It probably supplies me an exchange rate that values, you know, the euro at less than $1. But anyway, it is what it is. He says, thoughts on the decline in value of SpaceX. SpaceX is now trading at 118, I think, something like that, significantly below its IPO was 135. It peaked at almost 200, and it's come down to 118. How can it go down this fast in such a short amount of time after its IPO? Too many retail investors, for example? No, I don't know what too many means. I mean, basically, sanity is being applied. Look, SpaceX valuation made no sense when it went public. People bought it because it was, they bought it right at the beginning because they thought it would go up, and it did go up for a while on the hype. It's kind of a mega meme stock. And a lot of people sold at the top because they made their money and they walked away. But they bought it on the expectation that Musk was going to make them a fortune somehow, even though the company is losing money today. They bought it because they believe maybe XAI would be the AI company in the world, but everybody's revaluing AI right now. And it's not clear XAI can compete with the Chinese models. And it's not clear how it's going to make money. It's building massive data centers. How is it going to make money off of those data centers? Not clear at all. It can make money off of the rockets, but how much? And how much does it need to make in order to justify its valuation? So I think people are coming to terms with the actual economics of SpaceX, which is driving valuations down. Is the AI business really worth that much? How much is the space business worth? Now, Elon Musk believes that SpaceX is going to own the world. It's going to be bigger than the world because it's going to be interplanetary. But that's in a long time from now. And it's a high-risk project. So whatever cash flows you might project way into the future, you have to discount it today. And when you discount really large cash flows in the future with an appropriate risk premium to today, it turns out it's not worth that much. So people are reevaluating. SpaceX is still at 118, worth way more than I think the underlying economics justifies. So it is still, super expensive. I told you when the IPO happened that a lot of IPOs have very initial, huge hype. They go up and then they come down. And a year later are usually trading below the IPO price. That's true of many IPOs. And yet, a lot of IPOs, even when that happens, 10 years later, are trading way above the IPO price. Look at Google, look at Facebook, look at all these. They had huge IPOs, and then they settled down, they went down, and then they went through the stratosphere. SpaceX is already so expensive. I don't know what the upside is. It's already one of the biggest companies in the world and has no profits. How does it justify this valuation? I just don't know. So it doesn't surprise me. Now, there's also another factor. Sometime later this month or early August, some of the original shareholders, some of the investors, the venture capitalists, the employees, will be vesting. That means that they will be able to sell some of their stock. So sometime in late July, early August, approximately 911 million shares unlock and become available to trade. That happens on the second trading day after SpaceX's first quarterly earning report. So we'll see when that earning report comes out. I think a lot of people are going to sell. A lot of people who've got stock priced at pennies on the dollar, if you will, are going to make a fortune. They're going to become instant millionaires or centimillionaires or in some cases billionaires. And they're going to sell. At least they're going to sell a portion of their holdings. Now, in August to October, another 7% get released every 2 or 4 weeks. On December 8th, the standard 180-day lockup period ends for basically all the remaining shares except for Elon Musk's shares. And all those people, so all the venture capitalists who invested, all the private equity that invested over decades, and they've been sitting on paper gains that they have not been able to liquidate, they might sell. And I think the market is suddenly realizing any day now, SpaceX will release earnings, and then there'll be a big push to sell. And then from that point until December 8th, different people will be able to sell. And then December 8th is a big selling point. So a lot of people are expecting, I think, the stock to be lower at the end of the year. But look, you can't separate out the decline in SpaceX from what's happened to chip stocks, what's happened to people's views about AI, the uncertainty about AI. All of that is connected. And I think people are reevaluating what SpaceX is actually worth. And look, the spike up was driven by retail investors and kind of meme stock phenomena. The bounce down is sanity. It's sanity. Thank you, Remo. That's very generous. Let's see, there was, everything else was 50. Arthur, $50. Does much of Trump's success come from his refusal to apologize? His absolute refusal to back down even when he's completely wrong? This lack of bending the knee towards political correctness and altruism has resonated with the American public. Yeah, I think that's right. I don't know what you mean by success. You mean political success. Yes, I think there is a significant proportion of the American public that's fed up with the mealy-mouthed, soft-pedaling, apologetic, politically correct politicians out there and explicitly altruistic. I mean, the fact that he's poking it to the elites, the fact that he says what he thinks in quotation marks, the fact that he just doesn't care, the fact that he is not altruistic, he's guided by altruism ultimately in his decision-making, see the war in Iran, but he's not explicit about it. The fact that he's not whining, I mean, he whines, but in a different kind of way. Yeah, I think that's his appeal to whoever he appeals to. It's kind of a macho thing. Which reminds you, I didn't mention that Andrew Tate and his brother, I guess, are being arrested and they'll be extradited to the UK, which is going to accuse them of rape and all kinds of other human trafficking and a lot of other things. So maybe he will actually receive justice. Arthur, you mentioned most people typically can only think in binaries. Is the appeal of altruism that if the strong aren't meant to protect the weak, there would be no rational moral reason why the strong shouldn't exploit or subjugate the weak. I mean, that is the binary thinking that they have, right? So you've got two alternatives. You've got the alternative of we use morality to force people to, sacrifice to others. And if we don't do that, then people will force others to sacrifice to them. And that particularly applies to strong, but it applies to groups, to tribes. It applies really to everybody. Everybody will be angling to take advantage of other people. And so the two alternatives are sacrifice or be sacrificed. Sacrifice to others or demand that others sacrifice to you. And the idea that sacrificing others to yourself is somehow wrong, I think people get. And they view it as the only alternative is to sacrifice to others. And part of that is to restrain the strong, I guess. A perspective on restraining the strong in the name of the weak. Remember that Christianity that really invents altruism at scale is born out of weakness. It is a group that is a minority in an empire that doesn't either care about them or in some places persecutes them, but where they are clearly a weak minority. And they are often the poor, and they often lack any power. So they have a strong incentive to teach that the meek shall inherit the earth. They have a strong incentive to teach that you should sacrifice for the poor, you should sacrifice for the weak. So yes, I think that binary thinking is exactly that. All right, Not Your Average Algorithm has a two-part question, each $50. Thank you, Not Your Average Algorithm. All right, I've been hearing the argument lately that the welfare state, rather than transitioning an economy to socialism, actually prevents socialism. That only a market economy can provide enough surplus wealth to perpetually sustain a welfare system. And the welfare system's implementation was supported by major industrialists during the Great Depression to prevent the rise of actual socialism. I mean, I think that a lot of people think that way. I know a lot of rich people say, we have to have a welfare state because otherwise poor people will kill us. There'll be a revolution. Everybody thinks of the French Revolution. If we don't pay off the poor, the guillotines will come out and they'll kill us. But there's really no example of that in history. You know, the French Revolution was not primarily about economic inequality. It was economic inequality, but it was also political inequality. There was a king. There were aristocrats who were above the law. There was no equality of rights. There was no equality of law. A country like the United States or a place like Hong Kong or Singapore, places where there is vast inequality, but there's a rule of law, equality of rights. There's no reason to believe that the masses will rise up against, because partially the masses are massively benefiting from the inequality. I've often said that economics is not about trickle down, it's about flood down. The existence of billionaires creates massive values to all of us. And people at some level know that, whether they'll admit it to themselves or not. But rich people feel guilty. They feel bad for being rich. They haven't acted on the altruism. And as a consequence of that, they, are looking for ways in which to appease that guilt. The welfare state is a great way for them to appease the guilt. And they explain it to themselves as this is just self-defense. This is just self-defense. Now, it's true that only a market economy can provide the surplus wealth to sustain a welfare system. Now, for how long, it's not clear. we're going to test how long, I think, in the next few decades in the West. But there's no reason to believe that without a welfare state, what you get is socialism. Without a welfare state, you get wealth. You get a rising tide. You get standard of living, quality of life going up dramatically. And it goes up faster for the poor people than it does for rich people. I know that's hard to believe, but it is. Poor people's lives get better faster than rich people's lives get better. So poor people are the biggest beneficiaries of capitalism there is. And if people believed that and accepted that and learned that and understood that and embraced it and saw the morality of not raising poor people up, but the morality of freedom, then they wouldn't have to, in a sense, pay off the poor not to rebel, even though the poor weren't thinking of rebelling, with welfare, which arguably institutionalizes people into poverty, doesn't really eliminate it. It creates a permanent underclass and reduces economic growth. And by reducing economic growth, reduces the ability of poor people to grow out of poverty. So, yes, I mean, what's his name? The German chancellor in the 19th century, famous, his name is on the tip of my tongue. I mean, Germany introduced in the late 19th century the first welfare state. And it was explicitly introduced in order to curb the growth of socialism. But it's not like the alternative was capitalism. Germany didn't have really capitalism. Bismarck introduced the welfare state in Germany. Thank you. I like numbers. And the reason was to hold back the socialists and the communists. But the alternative wasn't capitalism. It should have been capitalism. Capitalism does a much better job holding them back because it makes them rich, relatively speaking. Right. So, I hear that argument all the time. I've heard it for years. It goes back to Bismarck. It was part of the justification by the industrialists supporting the New Deal in the 1930s. But it is wrong, and it is a capitulation that is completely unnecessary. And we all suffer for it, including the poor, including the welfare recipients, who would be much better off with capitalism and no welfare. Nature Observer. I thought DeepSeek had developed a technology that does not rely on high-end chips, and this caused NVIDIA to go down for a while, so many all-new Chinese models are based on this. Well, I mean, that's what they claimed. And then the claim was no, they actually figured out a way, basically in some way, to copy OpenAI or Anthropic. That is, to take advantage of what AI and Anthropic had done and to leverage that. Now, I don't know the technicalities of it. I don't know how that's done. But now people are coming to the conclusion that maybe they really have figured out something, a new technology. Maybe there is a new technology that's spreading around China that makes it possible to build models without the need for very advanced chips and these massive training protocols. So I don't know how they're doing it. And I don't think many people do know. But the reality is that they're achieving it. And and the Deep Six, the fears people have of what Deep Six would do to chip manufacturers, to AI companies in the US, are in a sense coming real, actually coming real. The fear is that they have a completely different way of doing it where they don't need, and they can compete without the most advanced chips, which nobody saw coming. James, do many people not change their ideas because their beliefs become their identity? Their beliefs become a psychological survival mechanism for their pseudo self-esteem. How do you break down people's walls to get them to switch premises? I mean, you're absolutely right, James. That's exactly what happens. And it gets more intense. And the walls get taller and stronger the older they get, because they've committed to this particular mechanism. The more of their self-esteem, pseudo self-esteem, the more of their identity is tied up with these ideas. And this is why it's very hard to break through to them, and in some cases impossible. You can't break through. Particularly if you take into account also Ayn Rand's identification, that most people choose at some point in their life not to go all the way conceptual, not to engage in the most abstract of thinking, so that if you challenge them from that level, they're stuck. And this is why it's very, very hard to change people's ideas, why it almost never happens. When there is a big shift, it's usually a shift at the emotional level, or a shift that is in the same direction as their ideas, even if not complete match. So communists can become fascist, fascists can become communists much easier than a collectivist to become an individualist. But this is why, if our goal is convincing, our audience is young people. And young meaning 16 to 30. Because the barriers are not that tall at that point. The walls are not that thick. The psychological commitment is not quite as intense. So we need to focus on young people. I've always advocated for focusing on young people, students, high school students, college students. That is our audience. Young professionals just out of college. That is the audience. Now, there are exceptions to any one of these things. Taltz Fani came to Objectivism at 40. But there are exceptions. There are exceptions. It's hard. It is very, very hard. So if you have limited resources, you want to target them at young people rather than at older people. Michael, can we take some solace in the fact that even nakedly corrupt thugs like Trump and Newsom know to not completely destroy capitalism? They know they can only maintain the corruption if there is an economy. They're not going to make us all poor. Well, I mean, for now, maybe that's true. But there's clearly a slow descent and an increase in the amount of controls and regulations that they want to impose. They're clearly testing the boundaries of what's possible and what's not. And you give them too much credit in the sense that they have the ability to just do enough not to destroy capitalism. But they don't know what they're doing. Not really. And at some point, they could easily make a mistake and, yes, destroy capitalism, even if they don't intend to. And I agree with you. I don't think they intend to. They want to keep the golden goose hatching those eggs, laying those eggs. But their ability to calibrate it, I would definitely question that. So there's always a risk that they would do something that tips the balance and puts us on a path towards destruction. I think Trump is playing with that. Like, for example, taking 10% or taking stakes in private companies is one of those things that could, over the long run, be so devastating that capitalism will not be able to recover from it. And we will become poorer. I don't know how poor, but we will become poorer. All right, that is all the $50 questions. That was a lot of questions. Thank you, guys. Really, really appreciate that. Thank you, Michael and James and Nature Observer and Not Your Average Algorithm, 100 combined, and Authors, 102 questions, and Remo. Thank you, guys. All right, Andrew, what have you found to be the most challenging aspect of preparing your course on Ayn Rand, and how are you planning to tackle it? I mean, really, it's to teach material I've never really taught before, which is metaphysics and epistemology. those are going to be the most challenging for me. The ethics I've taught many times in different formats and different ways. Obviously, capitalism, the politics is going to be easy. Aesthetics will be challenging, so I'm only doing half a class on aesthetics. And partially what I decided to do was to compress how much I talk about metaphysics and epistemology into one class, really focus it on the intrinsic, subjective, objective trichotomy, really position Rand versus religion versus subjectivism, relativism. Mention concept formation, the problem of universals, and hint at how she solves it, but not try to teach them that. Although, I think concept formation is not that hard. But yeah, the more you get into deep epistemology, the harder, the more difficult it would be for me to teach it. And then another thing is how to teach the novels without giving away too much of the plot and without the students having read the novels. So using the novels during the course, but not giving away too much, which is, I'm basically figuring that out as I go along on how to, I'll give them an overview of each novel in the front and then sprinkle in examples from the novels in between, hoping really to get them intrigued enough to go read the novels. That's my purpose. Purpose of a course like this at the end of the day is to get them to read the books. It's to get them to read the novels. It's to get them to engage in the philosophy themselves. Read Atlas, read The Fountainhead. Or for those who don't want to read fiction, read Oprah. Engage with the philosophy. Hopper Campbell, how come the people in New Hampshire with the live free or die flags don't produce a Silicon Valley while all the productive tech bros working on AI and that will transform the world for the better all voted for Mamdani? Well, I don't know that all voted for Mamdani or even a majority of them voted for Mamdani. Look, if you are willing to... the bottom line is this. Most of the people attracted to libertarian ideas, not most, a lot of the people attracted to libertarian ideas are weird. They're weird people. They're not necessarily very productive people. The people who devote their lives and their focus and their energy to obsessing about particular libertarian causes. They don't spend a lot of time on their own life, on achieving and producing and creating and building. They spend it on arguing and debating and wanting their guns and their drugs and their, I don't know what else they want to do on their property. And they're just not that engaged with production and creating the best possible life for themselves. They're obsessed with political arguments and political issues and political ideas, and they're willing to go to New Hampshire, not because they want to build a business there and they want to create and build and make something there, but because they're pursuing a political cause. I haven't met that many people who've gone to New Hampshire in the name of live free or die, who actually understand what that term means, what freedom actually means, understand why. I do this talk for libertarians. I've done it a number of times, and it's quite stunning. I ask them, why is freedom important? And they have all these political, economic, social answers, and it's all bogus. Why is freedom important? Because under freedom, I can live the best life for myself possible. I have the most opportunities to pursue my happiness. Freedom is about me. But they don't see it that way. So what you have is people who actually want to build, create, make something, that actually have self-esteem tied to work and production and creation. And many of those people just don't have time for political arguments and political ideas. They go to Silicon Valley to make and produce. And yeah, maybe when they make it, they become leftists because they've never challenged the underlying belief sets that they had growing up. But the point is that their primary orientation is a healthy orientation. This is why I love producers. I don't care what their politics is. It's why I love Silicon Valley. I don't care that so many of them are leftists and now a lot of them are new right. I love the spirit of building. I love the spirit of entrepreneurship. I love the spirit of producing, of creating wealth. And that virtue, wealth creation, is far more important than the politics that they adhere to. And it's sad that they have bad politics. It's sad for them because the morality ultimately catches up with them, and they become riddled with guilt. But much more significant, they want to do something. They want to change the world. They want to create. They want to build. And yes, these days they're captured by people on the right because the people on the right are not embarrassed by wanting to build and produce. People like Malcolm Andreessen and Peter Thiel are not embarrassed by their entrepreneurial skills. They're not embarrassed by the wealth they've created. And that's a virtue. They're bad political ideas. But again, it's a virtue not to be embarrassed and not to apologize and not feel guilty and to embrace it and to love it. I'd much rather have people like that than the leeches. And I'd much rather have people like that than so-called libertarians who fly the flag and, want to do all kinds of weird things on their property, but have never built really anything of substance, never pursued their own happiness really, and are irrational and partially attracted to libertarian ideas because they want permission to be irrational. That's a good formulation. A lot of libertarians, a lot of people attracted to libertarianism because it gives them permission to be complete subjectivists, complete relativists, complete irrationalists. And those people, again, are not builders. They're not my kind of people. Liam, would we be seeing this type of energy deregulation if it weren't for the influence of Alex Epstein? Will Alex be able to protect AI growth and data center expansion like he's done with fossil fuel industry? Well, I mean, it's going to be interesting, but are we seeing this type of energy deregulation? I mean, to some extent, Trump was doing this in his first term. I think he's more radical. I think there's more industry support. I think there's more support around it because of Alex. So no question, Alex has played a crucial role, and maybe the crucial role in making it happen. I don't know about AI. AI is hated both by the left and the right now. Alex doesn't have a lot of time. Remember, Alex has been working on energy for a long time, but he's also better at it. So maybe Alex will single-handedly help save us from this disaster. But we will see, and you should definitely support his efforts to do so. Liam says, did Trump decide to strike Iran because his advisors recognized it as an immediate threat to the United States, or because he's a bully that needed a target to throw his weight around on something and to stay relevant and feared on the world stage? I think probably a little bit of both. I think it was an opportunity for him to show how strong America is and to use that military, and he liked that. I think he's always talked about the nuclear, Iran nuclear. I think some of his advisors around him were definitely concerned about Iran going nuclear. He made it one of his campaign issues to prevent Iran from going nuclear. So that was an excuse. I think it's a combination of both. But he also wants to show the world. Didn't work out quite that way. He showed the world his weakness. James, even if Jimmy Carter engaged in deregulation, if he had won a second term, he would not have had the moral crusade against communism like Reagan did, the Soviet Union would not likely have collapsed under the second Carter term. He wouldn't have had the Mall Crusade, no question about that. He would have not had a Mall Crusade. But I think the Soviet Union would have collapsed no matter what. Whether it would have collapsed in 89 or whether it would take another 5 years, I don't know. But it would have collapsed. It was finished. I mean, once Gorbachev gets to power and he starts compromising with communism and starts loosening things up, and the Russians see what's possible, they're not going backwards. So it was just a matter of time at that point. So I don't think Jimmy Carter would have made that big of a difference. I don't think Reagan is that responsible. I mean, he definitely inspired a lot of the people in East Germany. So yeah, he bought some time, but this was kind of a historical inevitability. Rand predicted the Soviet Union would collapse in this way. It was just a question of when. And yes, with Jimmy Carter, it would have taken longer, but it still would have happened. Harper Campbell, despite our allegedly altruistic world, what made Reagan and Millet popular is their enthusiastic pro-freedom agendas. Yes, but remember, Millet was popular primarily not because of his pro-freedom agenda, but primarily because he was a breath of fresh air after decades and decades and decades of disaster. And the Argentinian people were basically at the point of, we'll try anything. And to some extent, that was true of Reagan. He comes in at a very dark point in American history. Jimmy Carter is very unpopular. The Iranians are holding Americans hostage in the embassy, embassy workers in Iran. The U.S. has just failed to rescue them, and Americans have died trying. The economy is doing very poorly. Japan is kicking our butt. The Germans are kicking our butt. Inflation is high. Unemployment is high. So Reagan only became popular, I think, by 84 because of his freedom agenda, because the economy had recovered. But it's not like people actually respond to freedom messages. They don't, usually. They sometimes do. And the question is what causes them to sometimes respond and other times not to. But it's not that if you had a candidate right now who had a freedom agenda, he would win. I don't think he would. I think he'd be rejected because people today in America are not interested in freedom. They're interested in going after those immigrants. Harper Campbell, why can't Trump slash taxes and regulations and become popular like Reagan and Millet? Well, because, he would have to work with Congress for it. And he doesn't have the personality for it. And he doesn't really believe in it that much. And it's not clear how popular Millet is. We'll see, right? We'll see in the next elections. But he's already cut taxes. And you can't slash taxes. There's too much expenditures. Indeed, you probably have to raise taxes in the short run. I mean, cutting taxes doesn't make any sense right now. I would simplify taxes, which is what Reagan did in '86. He raised taxes and simplified them, which I think was the real contribution Reagan made tax-wise. Slashing taxes would be a disaster right now. All you would do is increase debt. Slashing regulations, that requires working with Congress to pass laws. And Trump doesn't care enough. He doesn't care about freedom. He doesn't care about regulations. Harper Campbell continues, does this base not want that? No, they don't. He'd prefer to threaten people with ICE to win elections rather than make their lives better. Yes. This whole agenda is a negative one. Anti-ICE, anti-China, now anti-Iran, I guess. It's not a positive agenda. It's not a pro-human life agenda. I mean, compare his speeches to Reagan's speeches, and you get a completely different sense of his goals, his purpose. Arthur, if you haven't been exposed to objectivism to make sense of the world and keep you tied to reality in times of stress and injustice, it's very easy to go insane. It's probably why mental illness and drug addiction are so common. Yeah, I think that's right. I think that having a bad philosophy definitely increases the amount of drug addiction and probably also increases the amount of insanity, of mental illness in our world, depression and other things. A lot of that is connected to bad philosophy and bad ideas. Stephen, my 76-year-old dad just pointed out to me the Ayn Rand paragraphs in Vance's new book tonight. Guess you'll have to read it now. Sorry, but I won't have to. And it's just one of the many reasons I'm thankful for this show. Vance has written in the past, I've read in the past, that he went through an Ayn Rand phase and that he rejected it. He went through an atheist objectivist phase. And then he rejected that, partially thanks to Peter Thiel, who introduced him kind of to a more Christian perspective on the world. Yeah. Thank you, Stephen. Chris, with $50. Thank you, Chris. Chris says, I'm disappointed that Tom Brady, the NFL's most successful player, would compete, in quotation marks, with Jack Paul, an algorithm-savvy provocateur, and thereby lend legitimacy to these spectacles. Is this similar to Rand's sanction of the victim? Well, I don't know, right? Because I don't know exactly what you're talking about. I don't know who Jack Paul is and what he's competing with. It's not clear he's a victim here, but he is sanctioning evil. If what you're saying is true, or sanctioning bad stuff. Sanctioning bad stuff. So, this is an issue of dignity. It's an issue of honor. In objectivist ethics terms, it's an issue of integrity. To lower yourself to, play games with, I guess, somebody that's unsavvy is wrong because it goes against your values as a successful person. This is boxing. Jack Paul is a boxer. I don't know what Jack Paul is. Maybe Chris will tell us in the chat more about Jack Paul and what's going on. I don't know. Sometimes I'm not up to speed on some of the cultural things going on. Shazbot, for this scholarship, does it apply to someone who is under 35 in Jupiter years? Sadly, no. Sadly, no. I don't even know how to translate Earth years to Jupiter years, although I'm sure ChatGPT could help with that. No, Earth years, 35 under. Nice try, Shazbot. Andrew, do objectivists have things to learn from the modern wave of intellectuals converting to Catholicism? What void is Catholicism ostensibly fulfilling that objectivism could actually fulfill for seekers of meaning in life? Well, I mean, they're looking for meaning. But look, objectivism is selling you on a whole philosophy, whole way of viewing the world. And it's a controversial, a way of looking at the world that's in conflict with the common perceptions out there in the culture. So I don't know if we have much to learn from the Christians. I think the thing we should learn is to focus on meaning, to focus our energy on communicating the fact that objectivism has something to say about meaning, the meaning of life. And that what people converting to Christianity are doing is exactly undermining that. Right? Undermining that. So, I think we need to be more forceful in our attack on religion and our attack on faith as rejecting meaning. The only way to get your head around the concept of meaning is through reason, not by rejecting reason. So the whole thing is, I don't think we have anything to learn from Christians. we have something to learn about where we need to emphasize our educational efforts given Christianity's success in swaying people. Okay, Chris says something about Tom Brady slapped him in the face at some event over the weekend. It's absolutely ridiculous. Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I think it's beneath Brady to do this kind of stuff. But look, I don't know what Brady's moral character is. I don't know how much his understanding is. So I don't really have, I don't really know what to expect of Brady. But yeah, it's sad because he was a great athlete, and you'd want him to be a good human being to reflect the fact that he was such a great athlete. And to be a good quarterback, you have to be smart in some way. So, yes. Andrew says, connecting reason with spirituality. Well, I mean, it depends what you mean by spirituality, because, I mean, reason is spiritual. Reason is non-material, right? So spirituality is a tricky concept, and you've got to be careful not to fall into their definition of spirituality, which means anti-reason, right? The opposite of reason, which means, unexplainable. Spirituality, means that of consciousness, and reason is a part of your spirit. All right, Andrew has there's a bunch of stickers that I wanted to thank. Wes, thank you for the sticker. And Stephen, thank you. Greg and Bonnie, thank you. And Paul, thank you. Twice. Paul did 2 stickers. And I think I got everybody. And if not, here's my sticker. Thank you to everybody who did a sticker. Really appreciate that. Okay, Andrew had a question from, I don't know when, from some previous show that I didn't get to. So here it is. Have you looked closely at the Trump account program? Just listen to the All In podcast with David Sachs et al., where they were waxing poetic about them as a huge win for capitalism. I mean, it's not a huge win for capitalism, but it's a huge win for saving, which is good, and that's good ultimately for investment and therefore for the market. It doesn't teach anybody anything about capitalism, core capitalism. These are tax-free accounts that you can set up for a child when they're born. The government will put $1,000 in it. That's the bad part of the program. The good part is you can contribute, I think, up to $5,000 every year into this account. And that's fantastic. It means that if you do that, and if you can afford to put $5,000 every year into this account, and it accrues and it grows tax-free, then your child, when they get to the age of 20 or 30 or 40, will have a sizable amount of money. A sizable amount of money in that account by the time they're adults. And that is a great thing. So I'm all for tax-free accounts, and making them available to basically babies is a good idea. It's one of the few good ideas Trump has had. I wish, again, the government didn't put money in them. Charity, Michael Dell has contributed billions of dollars to contributing small amounts of money into these accounts. I think that's a great way to do charity, to put money into kids, let's say poor kids' accounts, and that will accrue tax-free. So every parent, whether you like Trump or not, should get a Trump account for their kids. It makes complete sense. And it's not linked to education. Everything else, all these other tax-free are linked to retirement or education. These are not. Now, I don't know exactly the rules of when you can withdraw it and how much taxes you pay when you withdraw it. But I do know that they accrue tax-free into the future. I find the All In podcast often really valuable and interesting, and sometimes just annoying and obnoxious. It's a really mixed bag. Remo says, I don't know how you root for Argentina and Brazil. Unsportsmanlike conduct is really ruining the game for me, and they excel at it. They have no integrity, honesty, or justice, zero sportsmanship. I don't know. I mean, I certainly don't think that applies to Brazil. I don't remember Brazil behaving in any kind of unsportsmanlike conduct or doing really brutal things. Indeed, in the old days, it was Brazil that was always brutalized. The only way to stop their dribbling was for European players to basically beat them up and to tackle them and to be brutal. It's how Pelé was knocked out of one World Cup, the 1962, I think, World Cup, knocked out in one of the games through an injury, and how they tried to stop him in 1970. So I don't know if that's true of Brazil. And I like the way they play football. And with Argentina, my support of Argentina is basically my support for Messi. I think Messi is the greatest player of all time. I love the way he plays. I like the way he handles the ball and the way he thinks. I don't like the way Argentina played yesterday, and they are much more aggressively physical than I think they should be. I heard that there was some significant unsportsmanlike conduct after the game. I didn't see it, so I don't know. And that is sad and unfortunate and bad. And, generally I wouldn't support Argentina football if Messi didn't play this. So, I think Spain deserved to win because they played a great game. They played beautiful soccer, beautiful football. So, yeah. Jacob, not a single childhood vaccine was tested against a saline placebo in clinical trials. I don't think that's true. For example, the landmark 1954 Salk polio trial included over 400,000 school children, half receiving the active vaccine and the other half receiving an inert saline injection. Similarly, saline or inert placebos were used in clinical trials for the measles, rubella, HPV, and pneumococcal vaccines. So I just don't think that's true. I think that's propaganda. This is based on Gemini. I don't think Gemini's lying to me here. I'm happy to cross-reference this with ChatGPT and XAI and anybody else, but it's just not true. So I don't think that's true. Now, new vaccines in modern trials are not tested against a saline. That's true. They're tested against old vaccines. So when you introduce a new vaccine, you have kids on the old vaccine versus kids on the new vaccine, and you test to see if the new vaccine is more efficacious and less damaging than the old vaccine. Makes complete sense, given that now that you have a working vaccine, it would be immoral to inject kids with saline. So just not true. There's a lot of misinformation about vaccines. That is one of them. Neo, what is going to take to force these Gulf countries to start attacking Iran? A strong U.S., a U.S. committed to victory. Why would they attack Iran if they're not convinced that the U.S. is going to follow through and actually win this and achieve regime change? Imagine if they attack Iran and then the United States cuts a deal with Iran and Iran gets stronger and now they're more vulnerable to Iran. So the only way they'll attack is if they believe the United States is committed to victory. Jacob, the childhood vaccine schedule never tested in totality if added more vaccines, potentials, more immune system dysregulation, autoimmune diseases. There's just no evidence of that. There's just no evidence of that. I mean, these things have been tested over and over again, and since hundreds of millions of kids, literally, I think hundreds of millions of kids, are getting these various vaccine schedules, and they vary from country to country. There's a massive, you can test this. You can see what happens. You can see across countries. Are kids in Denmark, because they have a different vaccine schedule, and kids in Germany, and kids in England, and kids in the United States, and kids in China who maybe don't get vaccinated, are they different outcomes? Is there more prevalence of autoimmune diseases? All this is testable and is observable, and again, no evidence that vaccines do harm and do damage. It's just not there. Just not there. Now, I'm not an expert, but every time I look at these things, every time somebody comes with some claim about the vaccines, about this stuff, and you go and actually do the research and you go down the rabbit hole, it's BS. Now, I know there's a whole rabbit hole where it's all true, but I think that is made up land. Every time I test this, that COVID vaccines was the best because the data was real. You could test it, you could see it, you could observe it. And I looked at the data from every angle, and the claims of the anti-vaxxers against the COVID vaccines amounted to zilch, nada, nothing. It was a massive, massive fail for the anti-vax. So why should I believe them on anything else? And they still put out stuff. And every study, the studies come out constantly, year after year, better refining the data about deaths and excess deaths. And all of them show that the COVID vaccine saved millions of lives and the side effects were there. Everything has side effects. But on a cost-benefit analysis, it's not even close. Not even close. Jacob, both Dr. Stanley Plotkin and Dr. Catherine Edwards under oath admitted the childhood vaccines clinical trials were not designed to rule out autism. But there's no causal link between vaccines and autism. Again, tested, tried, evaluated many, many times. The clinical trials maybe didn't, but you don't need clinical trials. You need a mechanism. And there is none. There's no causal relationship, and there's no empirical correlation. There just isn't, any more than an empirical correlation between many other things. And there's no causality. Nobody has shown causality. And indeed, it's not clear that there's an autism epidemic. That's the other aspect of it. A lot of the autism increases are just increases in diagnosis of stuff that's always existed. So, these are all, I don't know what motivates this, but for most people, the motivation is kind of an anti-science, anti-pharmaceutical, anti-profit motive. Not for everybody, but for a lot of people. Hopper Campbell, lower IQ, less educated people seem to have an easier time resonating with a leave me alone pro-freedom ideology. I don't think that's true at all. Completely, it's true that people who go to a university and get an education are corrupted by that education because the education sucks. But I don't think that low intelligence, if I take IQ as a proxy for intelligence, that low intelligence resonate more. The exact opposite. Freedom was an achievement of highly intelligent, highly educated people during the Enlightenment. And today, really in the Appalachian Mountains, the family of J.D. Vance freedom resonates with them? I don't believe that. I don't think that's true. They're welfare recipient leeches. And I think if you go to the uneducated people in the inner cities, uneducated people in a lot of the countryside in America, in poor areas, no, they're not pro-freedom at all. They want their stuff. They want people to give them stuff. I don't think there's a relationship between intelligence and advocacy for freedom. I think there's a relationship between education because education corrupts. James, do a lot of these welfare policies come from rich people who have never been poor? They don't see the destruction their policies are doing to these communities. They have no personal interactions with. No, I don't think that's. I think a lot of it comes from people who are poor. And look, some people who are poor remember that their parents got welfare checks, which allowed them to ultimately have food and go to school and get an education. And, J.K. Rowling wrote Harry Potter, the first Harry Potter book, while she was a single mom on welfare. So not all welfare stories are bad stories. And the reality is that a lot of these people, maybe even attribute some of their success to the fact that their parents got welfare. So it's not clear cut. It's not so clean to say people get welfare, they're destroyed. Yeah, but maybe their children somehow don't see that they got food and they can't imagine the alternative where their parents actually went to work. They think the alternative is we're even poorer and we don't have food. So again, it requires thinking to see that there are alternatives to welfare, that there's an alternative to welfare state, that that the world is not either they get welfare or they die, which is what a lot of people think it is. And a lot of people who got welfare think their situation was like that. All right, Jacob goes on with this aluminum adjuvants taken up by macrophages, brought to the brain, causes encephalitis, possibly encephalopathy, more shots, more aluminum in the brain. And yet, hundreds of millions of kids have been receiving these shots for generations now. And do we see a dramatic increase in these brain diseases? In these diseases? I don't know. Do we see large concentrations of aluminum? This is easy to test. You can test the fluid. Do we see massive concentration of aluminum in the brain? I mean, allow me to be super skeptical. And look, this is the root of my skepticism. At least 90% of all doctors, and at least 90% of all scientists really care about patients. They care about health. They want to do the right thing. Some of them are geniuses. Some of them are just average doctors and scientists. And none of them are bothered by this. None of them have seen this trend. In none of the medical journals do we have this alarm around aluminum. So the argument is the pharmaceutical companies buy them off. Really? Are doctors that corrupt that you can buy off a whole profession? I just don't believe it. And I know doctors. I grew up with doctors. My father was a doctor. If my doctor thought that or saw evidence that this stuff was going on, you couldn't buy him off. There was not enough money in the world to buy him off. So where are they? And I'm saying 90% of doctors are like this. So where are the 90%? Why is it so, why are there so few doctors who advocate for this? And why are those few doctors make a living off of exactly this? And advocating for a bunch of other, wacky ideas around medicine. We're living longer. We're living healthier. There are issues that relate. I mean, if you said this is causing young people now to have more colon cancer, okay, I know there's more colon cancer in young people, and I'm worried that should be something that should really be investigated. What is causing that? I don't know. I mean, maybe there's a link between childhood vaccines and colon cancer. I don't know. But I want something that's real. And then people are studying that. People are trying to figure out what's causing the colon cancer in young people. Much higher rates of colon cancer in young people than in the past. What's causing that? What do we do about that? So, again, all the doctors I know, not all the doctors I know, a couple of doctors who agree with you, but almost all the doctors I know, well over 90% of the doctors I know, don't see this. And they study this stuff. This is what they do. Noah, what do you think about the morality of commodity traders trading with adversaries of the U.S. who are sanctioned and helping those countries get around the sanctions? Yeah, I mean, I think that's horrible. Commodity traders who trade with sanctioned individuals who are clearly enemies of the United States, there are penalties for that. They're breaking the law. And it's morally wrong. It's morally wrong. Now, assuming these are real enemies of the United States, but yeah, if they're facilitating trade with Iran or with Russia, that is against their self-interest because it undermines the security of their own country where they live, and therefore it's against their self-interest and it's morally wrong. it's also illegal. Arthur, you mentioned most of the deregulation took place under Jimmy Carter. What did Reagan deregulate of any significance? I think mostly what Reagan did was a little bit like what Trump is doing, reined in the regulators and changed the attitude. And with Reagan, it lasted at least until Obama. He changed the attitude of regulators. He changed their attitude towards being, in most cases, the exception is going after Wall Street, but in most cases, to a much more hands-off approach. So it wasn't so much that he passed bills. That was Jimmy Carter. That was great success of Jimmy Carter that got rid of whole regulations. It was more the changing the atmosphere, changing the attitude of the regulatory agencies. And that impacted, he added more deregulation to railroads and trucking and transportation generally, airlines, some finance, although they also went pretty hard on Wall Street in New York through the Justice Department. I don't have a list in front of me, but it's mainly reining some of it in. Antitrust. They changed the antitrust doctrine under Trump, where they went after fewer cases and under much more stringent conditions, if you will. Ulysses, what would the S&P 500 look like in a purely capitalist system? Would it constantly go up? And if it didn't, what would explain drops? Well, look, the S&P 500 is an index of 500 companies. Some of those companies would be successful, some of it would not. Given that the economy would be constantly expanding and growing, the S&P 500 would mostly go up. It maybe not go up quite as much as it goes up today, because it goes up today partially because of inflation, monetary inflation, but it would still go up, less than what it does now in nominal terms. The thing that would make it go down would be foreign policy shocks, wars, invasions, trade blockages, other things that would hurt the economy. Other things that might make it go down is dramatic technology shocks. There could be periods of overinvestment like there was in dot-coms, or overinvestment like there were in railroads in the old days, that could cause, or in automobiles, that could cause a period of realignment where some companies went bankrupt. I don't know if the whole S&P would go down, but maybe a big technology shock like AI might cause it to go down as some companies decline and other companies rise, and the index has to be readjusted. But basically, it would be pretty upward direction. All right, guys, thank you. Really appreciate it. Not sure what to tell you about future shows over the next couple of weeks because I'm traveling so much. But they probably, I'm pretty sure there won't be a show tomorrow. And then maybe Wednesday there'll be a show, but probably, and if it is, it'll be late in the evening. Maybe Thursday, nothing Friday, nothing Saturday, nothing Sunday, nothing Monday, nothing Tuesday. A show on Wednesday, maybe on Thursday, and then I'm flying again. So once I get to Lisbon, which is basically on the 1st of August, I think, then we'll start getting into a schedule, and it'll be more routine. But the next 2 weeks, going to be really tough on programming. I will do what I can. I'll try to sneak in a few shows here and there, but it's going to be difficult. If my courses at Peterson Academy are going really, really well, and I don't have to do that much prep, then maybe I can do a show after them. But I'm also teaching 4 hours straight, so I'm not sure I'll have the energy to do a show. So anyway, I know you're going to go through withdrawal, but over the next week, really the whole week, don't expect, a week and a day maybe, don't expect shows. Andrew has a last minute question. Rand, when asked if her disbelief in religion meant that she doesn't acknowledge mysteries, said, I don't think mysteries are a license to invent. I don't think mysteries are a license to invent fantasies. Can also apply to anti-vaccine theories. Yes, I think that's absolutely right. It's a great way to put it. I don't think mysteries are licensed to invent fantasies. And this is what God has always been. The explanation for all the mysteries that we have, a fantasy explanation for the mysteries, for the things we can't explain, for the things we don't yet know. Thank you, everybody. See you when I see you. Not sure exactly, but have a great week without me.